In the Sierra Madre, in 1881, a woman kneels on a ridge above a Mexican cavalry column. She carries a bow and a blade and enough anger to outlast both. She has no husband. She has no children. She has been fighting since she was a teenager. The soldiers below have no idea she is there. Hollywood gave this story to the men. It always does. Every war cry, every last stand, handed to a man in a clean leather vest. But a question has followed these women out of those mountains for 100 years. Was the most dangerous Apache warrior on the frontier a woman? And if she was, why did every account written by the people who fought her leave her out of the record? Now, before we go any further, tap that subscribe button. What happened next was far more brutal than Hollywood ever showed. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the Army field reports, the post returns, the prisoner rosters, and the oral histories recorded on a reservation in New Mexico by a woman named Eve Ball, who sat with Apache elders in the 1950s and 60s and wrote down what they remembered. The Army wrote volumes about the Apache Wars, thousands of pages of correspondence, battle reports, and logistics. In almost none of it will you find a woman named. They appear as a category. Squaws, a number after a comma, killed 12 warriors, 8 squaws, 6 children. The paper trail was not built to remember them. So the oral tradition is, in many cases, all we have. This script draws from both, and it will tell you plainly which is which. Where the Army record speaks, we follow the record. Where only the spoken memory survives, we say so. That is the deal. Before the count begins, understand the world. Apacheria stretched from the Rio Grande to the Gila River, across the Chiricahua and Mogollon Mountains, deep into the borderlands of Sonora and Chihuahua. Dry, vertical, merciless. The Apache were not one people. They were many bands. Chiricahua, Chihena, Mescalero, White Mountain, Aravaipa. For 30 years, they fought two nations at once, Mexico and the United States. And in every major Apache film, from Broken Arrow in 1950 to Geronimo in 1993, the women stand in the background. Wives, mourners, victims. The record says otherwise. Let us start at the bottom. Number 25. Apache girls trained for war from childhood, and it was not optional. This was not encouragement. It was curriculum. Girls ran distance courses alongside boys across rocky ground in moccasins worn thin. They carried water in their mouths on long runs without swallowing, a training method for silence and breath control documented by the anthropologist Morris Opler in 1941. They practiced with bows. They learned to track game across dry stone. They learned to move through brush without snapping a twig. A father who did not train his daughter was failing her because the raid could come on any night, and when it did, there was no line between fighter and non-combatant. A girl who could not run could not survive what was coming. Every Western you have ever watched shows Apache women tending cook fires while the men ride out. The reality was a society where every single member was a potential combatant. There was no civilian category. There was only ready and not ready. And the training started before a girl could carry her own water. Number 24. The cradle board went to war. The baby came with her. Apache women carried infants strapped to rigid cradle boards during raids, night marches, and desperate flights through the mountains. James K. Wycla, who was Victorio's nephew, described women running through darkness with children on their backs while cavalry closed in behind them. The cradle board was not a nursery decoration. It had a rigid frame, a headguard to protect against brush and rock, and it was designed to be carried at a dead run. A woman did not stop being a fighter because she had a child. she carried both. The child on her back and the knife on her hip. Number 23. Women owned the home, and that was not a consolation prize. In Apache society, the dwelling belonged to the wife. When a marriage ended, the man left. The woman kept the wickiup, the food stores, and the authority. She controlled food distribution. She decided when to break camp. If she wanted a divorce, she placed the man's belongings outside the doorway. He walked away with what he could carry. This is documented across multiple sources: Opler, Goodwin, Basehart. It was the logistical spine of a mobile fighting nation. You cannot sustain a guerrilla war across two countries without someone managing the food, the shelters, the horse herd, and the water. The women were that someone. The men who rode to fight rode out from a camp the women controlled and could pack up and move in under an hour. Number 22. Women decided whether prisoners lived or died. The warriors brought captives into camp. The women judged them. In multiple Apache bands, senior women who had lost sons or husbands held recognized authority over the fate of a captured enemy. Burke noted this in his diaries with visible discomfort. A prisoner could be adopted, ransomed, enslaved, or killed. The women who had suffered the most loss held the most weight in that decision. A man taken alive after a raid that killed Apache children would face the mothers of those children. His life was in their hands, not the war leaders, hers, and whether she had buried a son that season. Number 21. Apache women tortured captured enemies, and the Army knew it. Hollywood cut this scene because it did not fit the victim narrative. Army accounts from the field and Mexican military records from Sonora and Chihuahua describe Apache women participating fully in the treatment of captured soldiers and rival warriors. Burke wrote about it. Mexican officers reported it. The movies either erased Apache women entirely or painted them as silent sufferers. The truth is they were full participants in every part of war, including its worst chapters. That does not make them monsters. It makes them warriors. And the difference matters. Number 20. The sunrise ceremony was a 4-day endurance trial, not a celebration. Na-e-ease, the making of a woman. 4 days and 4 nights. She danced for hours while the singers kept the rhythm going around the fire. She ran courses at first light, faster each morning. She knelt on buckskin through the cold desert night and was expected to show no weakness. She was not permitted to scratch her own skin. She drank water through a reed, never with her lips. The Indeh community watched. Every stumble was witnessed. This was documented by Opler and later by Claire Ferrer. A girl who endured it walked out the other side as a woman the community trusted to carry its burdens. Including a weapon. Including a war she did not start. The ceremony is still practiced today on the Mescalero Reservation. It still lasts 4 days, and the girls who go through it still run at dawn. Number 19. Women ran the supply lines for raiding parties. A war party without its women did not eat. Apache raids were not men galloping out while women sat waiting by a fire. They were coordinated military operations. Women prepared dried meat weeks ahead. They scouted escape routes and cached food and water at intervals along them. They knew where every spring was and which ones the Army had already poisoned. Jason Betzinez, who rode with Geronimo's band, described women driving stolen livestock at a run through pitch darkness in rough canyons while warriors held off pursuit somewhere behind them. A raiding party could travel 70 miles in a day. That pace was only possible because someone had placed food and water along the route before the raiders ever mounted up. That someone was a woman, cut the women out, and the war machine stops cold in 3 days. The warriors knew this. The army eventually figured it out too. Number 18. Apache women could outrun cavalry horses over broken ground, and the army said so. This is not legend. This is a complaint filed by the officers doing the chasing. During the Victorio campaign of 1879 and 1880, and again during the Geronimo pursuit, Army reports note with something between frustration and awe that Apache women on foot, carrying children and supplies, moved faster through mountain terrain than mounted soldiers. Burke wrote it in his diary. General Crook's own officers confirmed it. Today, the average American walks about 3,000 steps a day. These women covered mountain miles at night with a child on one shoulder and a bag of ammunition on the other. Number 17. Women fought at the Camp Grant massacre, and it was not enough. April 30th, 1871, before dawn. A force of 48 Americans, 92 Tohono O'odham, and a small group of Mexicans attacked a sleeping Aravaipa Apache camp near Camp Grant in Arizona Territory. Lieutenant Royal Whitman's report and the subsequent trial record document what happened next. Approximately 144 Apache were killed. The vast majority were women and children. Some women fought back with rocks, with knives, with whatever they could reach in the dark. It was not enough. The attackers were tried in Tucson that December. The jury deliberated for 19 minutes. All 148 defendants were acquitted. Let that number sit. 19 minutes. Remember the question I asked at the start. The most dangerous Apache warrior might be a woman, but to find her, you have to look in places the official record was never designed to show you. Number 16. The Army erased women from its battle reports on purpose. If you read the official record and nothing else, these women did not exist. Army after-action reports from the Apache Wars almost never name an individual woman, not once in thousands of pages. They filed women under a single word. They counted them the way they counted captured livestock. When women fought in an engagement, the report either left them out entirely or folded them into the general term hostiles. A lieutenant writing his dispatch by lamplight after a skirmish did not have a category for the woman who fired at his men from the rocks. His form had a line for warriors killed. It had a line for warriors captured. It had a line for squaws and children. There was no line for a woman with a weapon, so she disappeared from the page. She was not hidden. She was simply unrecordable. And when the historians arrived a generation later, the page was all they had to work with. You cannot find what the record was never built to hold. Number 15. Apache women were expert horse thieves, and the economy depended on it. She did not just ride the horse, she stole it first. Horse raiding was not a sideshow. It was the economic engine of Apache resistance. Horses meant speed, trade, food in desperate times, and the ability to cross 100 miles of open desert before the army even knew you had moved. Women participated directly. Oral histories from the Mescalero and Chiricahua bands describe women driving stolen herds across the border at night, through narrow canyons and dry washes in country where one wrong turn meant a box canyon and capture. Army patrols rode in wide circles behind them and found nothing but tracks. A good horse in the 1870s could be worth $50 or more. A herd of 20 was a fortune. A woman who could move that fortune at speed in the dark without losing a single animal was not a supporting character in the story. She was the story. Number 14. Women were the intelligence network between bands, the scouts you never heard about. Apache women moved between camps, carried messages across hostile territory and reported troop movements back to the war leaders. A woman traveling with a child could approach a settlement or an army road without drawing the suspicion a mounted warrior would. She could count the soldiers at a garrison, note where the supply wagons were heading, and walk back into the mountains with information that determined whether a raid happened or was called off. General Crook noted that Apache intelligence was faster than his own couriers. He blamed his scouts. He rarely considered that the woman carrying a basket past his outpost might be the reason his ambushes kept failing. Number 13. At least one Apache woman held the rank of chief and led raids. Her name surfaces in a handful of sources and nowhere else. Dilth Clahen is referenced in Apache oral tradition as a Chihenne woman who organized and led war parties against enemies of her band. She is not a figure the Army recorded. No military dispatch mentions her by name. No newspaper printed a word about her. She exists in the oral memory of her people and in the notes of the researchers who listened. The documentation is slim, but the social structure that made her possible is thoroughly attested. Apache leadership was not inherited, and it was not assigned by gender. It was earned by results. A person who demonstrated judgment, courage, and the ability to bring people home alive could lead a raid regardless of whether that person was a man or a woman. The community followed competence, and according to the people who remembered her, Dilth Clahen had it. The sourcing is thin. The principle behind it is not. Number 12. Hollywood needed Apache women to be victims. The truth refused to cooperate. From Broken Arrow in 1950 to Geronimo in 1993, every major film about the Apache Wars casts the women in exactly the same roles: love interest, mourner, massacre victim. Sun Ciara in Broken Arrow exists to fall in love with Jimmy Stewart and then die beautifully so the audience can feel something. That is her entire function. The woman who stole horses in the dark, the woman who fought from a mountain ridge, the woman who stood over a prisoner and decided whether he lived or died. None of them appear. Not once. Not in 70 years of Westerns. The reason is structural. A female Apache warrior does not fit the architecture of the genre. She is not the damsel. She is not the noble savage. She is not the love interest who softens the hero. She breaks every formula the Western depends on. So the screenwriters left her on the cutting room floor. And that is exactly why most of the people watching this video right now have never heard the name that belongs at number 1. Number 11. Women fought and died at Tres Castillos, where Victorio fell. October 15, 1880. The desert of Chihuahua, Mexico. A dry lake bed surrounded by low, rocky hills. Mexican forces under Colonel Joaquin Terrazas had tracked Victorio's exhausted band for days and surrounded them in the night. When dawn came, the shooting started. Victorio was killed. Approximately 78 of his people died with him on that ground. The survivors, mostly women and children, were taken as prisoners by the Mexican army. Some of those women and children were later sold into slavery in the households of Chihuahua. It was legal under Mexican law at the time. Women fought in that final defense. They fired from behind the rocks until the ammunition was gone and there was nothing left to shoot. And the one woman who might have changed the outcome of that morning was not there. She was 100 miles away, on a different mission entirely. She had left the band days before to escort a pregnant Mescalero woman across the open desert to the reservation. She delivered the woman safely. Then she turned around and rode back toward the war. She learned of the massacre after the fact. Hold on to that. We are coming back to her. Number 10. The word squaw was a weapon, and the Army used it with purpose. Language does its own kind of killing. When an Army report read killed, 12 warriors, 8 squaws, 6 children, That word told every reader who came after that these were not combatants. They were baggage. It did not matter that some of those women had been fighting from the rocks 10 minutes before they were killed. The category had already been assigned. The word stripped them of names, actions, and agency. Newspapers reprinted the Army language without question. Historians repeated it for a century. And when Hollywood came to make movies, the paper trail they drew from had already decided that Apache women were not part of the war. The language built the LIE. The lie became the legend. Number 9. Some Apache women chose the warrior path for life, and their people honored them for it. There was a recognized place for them. Opler documented women in Apache society who rejected the domestic path entirely and took up the warrior role as a permanent identity. They trained with weapons, they rode on raids, they fought alongside men, and were judged by the same measure. They did not marry. The community recognized them as warriors with earned standing and a voice in the decisions before a fight. Today, roughly 7% of active-duty United States military personnel in combat roles are women, and that number is considered a historic high. In Apache society 150 years ago, the barrier was never gender. It was competence. If you could fight, you fought, and nobody wrote a policy paper about it. Number 8. Apache women fought from elevated positions with accuracy the Army respected. The weapon did not care who held it. During engagements across the Mogollon Rim country and deep into the Sierra Madre, Army officers reported taking fire from elevated positions held by fighters they could not always identify by gender. Betsinez described women taking up defensive positions during the final campaigns. By then, weapons were scarce and every advantage was precious. A woman who could fight from high ground was not a curiosity or a novelty. She was a necessity, and she knew it. Number 7. Apache women carried battlefield medicine. The Army did not understand. She treated the wound before the surgeon arrived, sometimes better. Apache women used plant-based wound treatments, hide tourniquets, and cauterization with heated stone. They used hooked cactus spines as sutures, pulling wound edges together in the mountains where the nearest Army surgeon was 100 miles away. They knew which plant stopped bleeding, which bark reduced swelling. Burke noted Apache medical practices in his diary with grudging admiration. He had seen what Army field hospitals looked like: dirty instruments, surgeons still debating germ theory while men died of infected amputations. In the Sierra Madre, an Apache woman with a poultice and a steady hand may well have had better outcomes than the uniformed doctor back at the fort. Number 6. Dateste rode with Geronimo, negotiated the surrender, and outlived every man in the story. She walked into the Army camp alone, twice. Dateste was a Chokanen Apache woman who served as a warrior, a messenger, and a translator. She appears in Army photographs. You can see her face. She rode with Geronimo's band during the final campaigns of 1885 and 1886. When Lieutenant Charles Gatewood went into the Sierra Madre to negotiate Geronimo's surrender, Dateste crossed between the Apache camp and the Army lines carrying messages, alone, unarmed, into the guns of men who had been trying to kill her people for years. After the surrender, she was shipped to Florida with the other prisoners. She survived Fort Marion. She survived Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama. She survived Fort Sill. She returned to the Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico and lived until approximately 1955. Dateste is one of the only Apache women from the wars whose name, face, and story survive in both oral history and written record. She is proof. We are almost there. The question I planted at the beginning is about to be answered, but the answer is not simple, and it never was. Number 5. Guyen tracked a Comanche chief alone, killed him in his camp, and walked home carrying his scalp. Her husband was dead. The man who killed him was still alive. She decided to change that. Guyen was a Chihene Apache woman. According to oral history recorded by Eve Ball from Apache elders at Mescalero, Guyen tracked the Comanche war party that had killed her husband. She found their camp. She entered it at night. She killed the chief. She scalped him. She stole his horse, and she rode home. No Comanche source confirms it. No army record mentions it. The story exists because Apache elders told it to a woman with a notebook, and she wrote it down. Whether that is enough depends on how much weight you give to the memory of the people who were actually there. The strongest evidence we have for this woman is the spoken word of her own people, passed down through named individuals across generations. That is a real kind of evidence. It is not the same kind as a court document, but a court document would not have cared about her at all. Number 4. After the surrender, the Army shipped the warriors and the women to Florida. Then it watched them die. In September of 1886, approximately 500 Apache were loaded onto railroad cars and sent east to Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida. The stone fort was built for a small garrison, not 500 mountain people. Malaria came first, then tuberculosis. The Army moved survivors to Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama, where the damp lowland air filled their lungs with disease they had no resistance to. Children were separated from families and sent to the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, where many never came home. Women who had fought, scouted, stolen horses, and carried children through the Sierra Madre were imprisoned under the same terms as those who had never held a weapon. The Army made no distinction. The only category that mattered was Apache, and the category carried a death sentence no court ever issued. Number 3. The United States Army deployed 5,000 soldiers to capture 35 people, and a significant number of those 35 were women. 5,000 against 35. 1/4 of the entire standing army, plus hundreds of Apache scouts, pack mules, telegraph lines, and supply depots stretched across 2 countries. That band included warriors, yes, but it also included women, children, and elderly. The women moved the group. They managed the horses. They cached the food and water. They carried children across mountain passes in the dark. And they fought when fighting came. It was not 35 guerrilla fighters the Army was chasing. It was a complete society in motion. The women were the infrastructure that kept it alive. Remove them and the band collapses in a week. The generals knew it. That is why surrender terms applied to every last person, not just the men with weapons. Number 2. Lozen had a ceremony that told her where the enemy was, and the people who fought beside her swore it worked. She stood on the ridge. She raised her hands to the sky, palms upward. She turned slowly in a circle, and her palms began to tingle. The enemy was to the east. James K. Waikla told this to Eve Ball in a small house on the Mescalero Reservation decades after the wars ended. He said Lozen possessed a power granted through ceremony. She would stand with arms outstretched, sing a prayer, and turn. Her hands would darken and tingle in the direction of the enemy. The stronger the sensation, the closer they were. Victorio relied on this before engagements. K. Waikla said the power was real and that it was never wrong. No Army report corroborates this. No contemporary written document mentions it. This is the testimony of a man who was there as a child, telling a researcher what he witnessed and what his family told him. That is a real kind of evidence. It is not the same kind as an officer's field report. And that tension is the whole point. So here it is. The woman who may have been the most dangerous Apache warrior on the American frontier. A woman no Army document names. a woman whose story rests entirely on spoken memory, not on paper. Is that enough to call her number one? Number one, Lozen, the warrior who never married, who fought from Victorio's war to Geronimo's surrender, and who died in a prison camp without a single line in the official record. She was Chihenne Apache, sister of the war chief Victorio. Kewikla called her a shield to her people. She never took a husband. She never had children. She trained as a warrior and a horse thief, and by every oral account, she was among the best at both. She fought through Victorio's war, across New Mexico and Texas, and deep into Chihuahua. She was at her brother's side through ambush after retreat after stand. And then, in October of 1880, she was not there. When Victorio made his last stand at Tres Castillos, Lozen was miles away. She had left the band to escort a pregnant mescalero woman across the desert to the reservation. She crossed the Rio Grande with the woman and the newborn child. She delivered them to safety. Then she stole a horse and a weapon from a ranch and rode back alone toward the war. By the time she returned, her brother was dead, most of his people with him. She joined the survivors. She found what was left and kept going. She rode with Geronimo's band through the final campaigns. She was present at the surrender in Skeleton Canyon in September of 1886. She was put on a train. She was shipped east. She died of tuberculosis at Mount Vernon Barracks, Alabama, sometime around 1889. No exact date survives. No marked grave has been found. The most complete account of her life was spoken by a man who knew her, to a woman with a tape recorder in a small house on a reservation decades after the frontier closed. Now stop counting and start asking what we actually know and how we know it, because this is where the story changes shape entirely. Everything we know about Lozen comes from Apache oral history, principally through Kewikla and Eve Ball. Ball was careful. She cross-referenced. Kewikla was a first-hand witness to parts of the story. But no Army document names Lozen. No period newspaper mentions her. No prisoner roster has been conclusively matched to her Apache name. Compare that to Dahtest, who appears in photographs, who is named in Army records, who lived long enough to be documented by the modern world. Dahtest is provable. Lozen is remembered. Sit with that difference for a moment. Is oral history from the people who lived through the war less reliable than Army reports written by the men who were trying to kill them? The Army had reasons to erase. The Apache elders had reasons to remember. Neither side is neutral. Neither source is clean. Three forces built the wall that kept these women out of the story. First, the Army's own reporting structure. It was designed to document engagements between soldiers and warriors. Women who fought were administratively invisible. They could not be named because the paperwork had no line for them. Second, Hollywood. The Western genre required Apache women to fill exactly two roles: the silent wife or the massacre victim. A woman who could outrun a horse, steal a herd in the dark, and fight from a ridge did not fit the script. So for 70 years of cinema, she was never written into one, not in Broken Arrow, not in Geronimo, not once. And third, the academic world of the 20th century, which treated oral history as folklore and Army paper as fact. Eve Ball spent years recording Apache testimony from the people who were there. Her books were not taken seriously as history until decades after they were published. The people who knew Lozen were dismissed as unreliable witnesses because they had lost the war. So here is my answer to the question I asked at the start. Lozen deserves the top spot, not because the evidence is ironclad. It is not. But because the kind of evidence that survives is exactly the kind the system was built to destroy. The Army did not name her. Hollywood did not cast her. The Academy did not cite her. The only people who kept her story were the people who fought beside her. And they told it the same way, to the same researcher, over years without contradiction. That is not proof the way a court filing is proof, but it is something. And the harder truth is not about Lozen at all. It is about the women who have no name left. The women at Camp Grant who fought back with rocks in the dark and did not survive to tell anyone. The women who ran supply lines through the Mogollon and were never recorded, not in army paper, not even in oral history. Lozen became the symbol because she had a relative who lived long enough to sit down with Eve Ball and speak. Most of them did not. Somewhere in southern New Mexico or in the red clay of Alabama, there is ground that holds an Apache woman who fought, who ran, who stole horses, who carried children through the dark, who killed to protect her people, and who died without a single line written about her in any language. Hollywood did not hide her story. Her story was never given a chance to exist. Which one would you have feared most? Tell me below. And if you want the truth behind another frontier legend the movies got wrong, the next one is already waiting for you.